Dear distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, professors of our university and administrative staff, you are all welcome to Science and Society Meetings 16. This series is gonna continue with the participation of distinguished guests, such today's Dr. Detlev Quintern'i from Turkish-German University. We are very pleased to see again our professor to host and make their comments about the cultural heritage and its reflections on different categories and samples from the Anatolian and Turkish history. Welcome, Dr. Detlev Quintern'i. Today, and also here the host of these events and the also inventors of the events, Professor Dr. Yücel Uğurlu, is rector of our university. A special thanks to him. He is always getting together and participating in his distinguished ideas, thoughts, and perspectives about the relevant topics. This is why I'm very thankful for my university to his support of this series. And now I would like to give the space to the Professor Uğurlu for his welcoming speech for today's event. Please.
Thank you very much. Dear distinguished guests, dear academicians, dear students, and esteemed audience, welcome to the 16th Science and Society meetings organized by our university, Istanbul Commerce University. In the Science and Society meetings, we started in October 2019. We have organized conferences in different fields from law to information technologies, from artificial intelligence to communication sciences. Academicians from the world's most important universities such as Oxford, Harvard, Nevada, Manchester universities, Illinois universities made presentations in different fields and shared their experiences, academic experiences with us. In the activities we held under the title of Science and Society meetings, our main purpose was to bring important academicians together with our people, with our academics, with our students, and to explain the latest developments in the scientific field to the public, based on the fact that universities have a mission to be beneficial to the society, as well as their mission of producing science and education, because universities are responsible to society in several respects that they live in. Today we will listen to an interesting and important topic from Dr. Quintern. Professor will make a presentation titled From Seka Paper Factory to Göbekli Tepe-Museums, Cultural Heritage and Folk History. As you know, the history of paper production in Turkey begins with Seka. It is namely Turkey pulp and paper plant, which was the most important element of the culture for thousands of years. Paper. Today, this factory of Seka in Kocaeli is used of Seka Museum, as I know, Seka Museum or Seka Paper Museum. We all know about Göbekli Tepe. As a result of the excavations started in 1990s in Şanlıurfa, one of the ancient cities of Anatolia, the world's first building groups that don't operate as settlements but only use it as places of worship emerged. Göbekli Tepe has been instrumental in turning a new page in the history of humanity, with it as nearly 12,000 years history. Based on this, it has been that Anatolia has been home to various civilizations for thousands of years and has a very important, very crucial place in terms of human history, in civilization history, we can say. Actually, I am as curious as you are about the cultural relationship that our professor will establish between a paper museum and a historical place of worship. For this reason, I don't want to extend my words too much. I don't want to take too much your time for accepting our invitation. I thank Dr. Quintern and our administrative and academic staff for organizing this conference. On behalf of myself, I thank on behalf of myself and also my university. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, the rector of our university, Professor Dr. Yücel Uğurlu, for his also contributions about the topic that we're gonna make a deepening analysis with the Dr. Detlev Quintern. Thank you very much, our rector of our university, Professor Uğurlu. And also today joining us, Füsun Alver is the professor doctor of our university and the head of the Institute of Internet and Communication Sciences. And also special thanks to her because she organized and made this introduction to get together today, Dr. Detlev Quintern, for this distinguished event. This is why I would like to give a short space for her contribution and welcoming speech, whether in German or English.
Thank you very much. Herr Dr. Quintern, ich bedanke mich herzlich, dass Sie hier gekommen sind. Und das Thema ist sehr interessant für uns. Ich denke, unsere Studenten werden viel davon profitieren. Vielen Dank.
Dankeschön. Thank you very much. And dear distinguished guests, now we are starting our conference on From the Seka Paper Factory to Göbekli Tepe-Museums, Cultural Heritage and Public History and Potentials in Turkey. Before starting our distinguished conference, I would like to give short introduction about the biography of Dr. Detlev Quintern. Then I would like to give the stage to his presentation. Dr. Detlev Quintern is assistant professor at Turkish-German University, where he teaches cultural history, heritage, and museum studies. At Fatih Sultan Mehmet Vakıf University in Istanbul, he had been teaching history of science between the years of 2013 and 2019. He was director for training and development at the Professor Dr. Fuat Sezgin Research Foundation for the History of Science in Islam 2011 and 2019. Also, he was the editorial board of Islamic Philosophy and Occidental Phenomenology in Dialogue. After studying international economics and political sciences in Bremen, Arabic and Oriental studies in Hamburg and Leipzig, he graduated with a PhD in history from Bremen University. And it's parallel to teachings at German universities such as history, international economics and relations, cultural studies and museology. Since 1997, he had curated museums exhibitions, thereby following a universalistic approach in which cross-cultural conveyances and interlacing are studied. His current main research interests are the history of geography, cartography, and travel writings, and ethics of cross-cultural understanding and such philosophy concerns. Yes, and now I would like to give the stage to Dr. Detlev Quintern for his presentation and for his share about this very distinguished topic. Please.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Professor Asle, for the kind introduction. Thank you for Füsun kind motivating words, and not least for the distinguished rector to frame the topic in such a nice, motivating way. So I will start, and first I have to open for you the screen. So is it possible for you? You see and can hear me well, I hope so.
Yes, okay. It's quite good.
Okay, thank you. So what I would like to do is to introduce and to outline to you the process, mainly the process of the transition of the Seka card Fabrikasından, of the Seka card fabric, into a museum, which is at the same time a space for public history and education. And I did develop kind of concept draft in 2011 for this process of musealization of this, in my opinion, most beautiful fabric. I mean, you can see, and we do not have even such examples sometimes in Germany, the Bauhaus architecture from this famous architectural school in the 1920s, Gropius and the Weimar School. It is a beautiful architectural site, industrial architectural site, and of course, I mean, it is related to the people's memory, what I call the inhabitants of Izmit. Seka card fabricacy is a kind of microcosm, I would say, and it plays a very important role in the local history of Izmit, Kocaeli, as a province. And I will speak about this interplay, the relationship between the potential of Seka card fabricacy museum, the museum, to visualize cultural history and to revive the people's memory. How does this interplay, and what potentialities this museum and educational space has? So when visiting the Seka card fabricacy, the fabric in around 2007, 2008, I mean, I was amazed. It was just like left a minute before this beautiful place. And also, I mean, you can see these steel carriers. And on the one hand, it was left, and on the other side, it was still alive. And it had this beautiness of this, I would say, there are aesthetics in such spaces like Seka card fabricacy, like the Seka card museum, in the architecture and even in the detail. And there were, of course, when thinking about to transform this space into a museum, there are many challenges. It is, I mean, obvious challenges with regard to restoration, conservation, to keep this beautiful aesthetics on the one hand, and on the other side, to make it possible to transform this industrial space into museum and educational space. So it took at least 6 years, as you know, or nearly more than 5 years to transform this space. This is one of my favorite. It was in this period in 2010. I was so impressed when I saw this matbah, the printing hall, where, I mean, this typesetting machines, all these old printing machines, some from the 19th centuries, Heidelberg, for example, other ones as well. And I mean, what a beautiful working space. Even you had a Manzara, you had a view on the, it is, I think geographically, it is an arm of the Marmara Sea. It is a bay, the nearby bay. And at the same time, you did print cartons and so many, there was even a newspaper for the workers was printed inside the building beside cartons, and even cigarette papers and so on. So such a beautiful space, and to keep this beautiness was probably the biggest challenge for the whole process of the restoration and especially the architectural team. So this is nowadays the musealized printing hall. And I mean, this concept finally succeeded. Of course, it could not be kept every detail, but even also the machinery park in the printing hall still is comprehensible in its function and in its steps, step by step, how to typesetting, how to print. Another challenge and another, I mean, this is something specifically in Turkey. I mean, wherever you dig, you find a layer under beneath. So the archaeological heritage, and we will later speak about Göbekli Tepe, which indeed is 12,000 years back, but also in Seka, the Seka Paper Museum is located in a very important Roman harbor, which is, I mean, most famous in the period of Diocletian. I mean, he was not very, I mean, he is famous, but famous mainly for the persecution of the Christians in this period. So the Diocletian, it's memorized with the persecution of Christians, mainly in 1770 after Christ. And here we do have also the ruin of a palace of Diocletian. It's not the only one. I mean, there is a temple of Demeter, and I mean, I found it so fascinating when walking around Seka, you do find several columns, several styles. You still have these archaeological, not even excavated, but sometimes due to construction works, it was unearthed and it is visible. So the historical path later in the museum started with Nicomedia, with this place, also in cooperation with the nearby archaeological museum. So this is another beautiness of this place, that you do have these several layers in the history, tracing back to Nicomedia and even far beyond into history. So the concept and the idea was, I mean, it is not only, I called it not only the machine traces, but what mainly should have been done, and it had been done beautifully later, was on the one way to revive the production, to show the flow of, let's say, from the tree to the newspaper, to the printed paper. This whole process, how to produce industrialized paper, that was, I mean, the main attempt to show this, let's say, technical, historical flow of paper. The second column, I would say, and most important, was to memorize the daily life in and around the fabric. And the third part was to create a space for public history and cultural education. And honestly spoken, we did visit several places also in Germany and other parts of Europe. This Seka paper fabric has amazing potentialities, especially with regards to public history, cultural education, and to integrate this cultural education into, also linking it with schools, but also universities and other educational spaces. So let's speak shortly. I mean, you know this history of the Seka card fabric. I do not want to speak too much about it. Most important, and it was mainly thanks to the initiative of Mehmet Ali Kağıt, who started, I mean, he came from his father, he came from a naval family. First, he wanted to study naval shipbuilding, naval architecture, which was due to the First World War was not possible. And then later he decided he went first to Hanover in Germany and then also to Grenoble, where he studied paper chemistry mainly. And he was the driving force behind establishing the first industrialized paper fabric in Turkey. It was a process from the 20s. There were, of course, always obstacles. And I mean, it was already Mustafa Kemal, once he was asked, I mean, that was toward the end of the First World War, would there be need of help in this period from Russia at the turning point? I have to say it was at the turning point from Tsarist Russia to the Soviet Union. And he answered, we do not need weapons, we need paper. That's a rumor. And I find it very impressive, interesting. This awareness to become independent. And in this period, if we look in the history of media, I mean, paper and let's say the communication of information was mainly based on paper in this period. So to be independent meant to have an independent paper industry in this period. And thanks to Mehmet Ali Kağıt, it was then financed by, at least, I mean, finally it was, I think, Sumer Bank who gave the credits for the realization of this ambitious project. So I give you some certain impressions from the opening ceremony. I think that was the opening ceremony on the 14th of August in 1936. Another one here, and you can see Mehmet Ali Kağıt, he was motivated and so impressive how he explained. I think that is İsmet İnönü, is it right? I think correctly, to explain to him how this process of producing in this case, the pulpa, the hamur, you say, and how it works. There are beautiful archives of old photographies, and these photographies played an important role for the concept of the museum as well. So the main idea was to show this from pulp, from kağıt, hamur, to printed paper. Station by station, it was followed beautifully. And I will shortly give you an impression as also the how do you say, the website might have been a possibility, but it will maybe take too long. It's not so necessary at the moment. So, I mean, the paper production is mainly based on the paper pulp, and it needs a lot of energy, it needs water, and it needs mainly tree trunks. And you could see, I mean, this bay in front of the Seka Park, from there the trees came into the fabric and then were worked up to pulpa in a long process. before finally then paper rolls up to more than 400 kilometers were produced. So you could roll a paper roll from Seka nearly to Ankara. So a long, long paper roll was produced. And this guaranteed the independence, Turkey's independence from the import of paper mainly, which was not possible before. So this was, let's say, for the history of industrialization of Turkey, it was a very important step, I think, to build this Seka Fabrikasından. So on the one hand, let's say it is a little bit technical history, the path from pulp to paper. And the concept for the museum also was a kind of inclusive concept. So it came to my idea, I mean, who knows best how this machine works? The workers, of course. The workers who worked before in the Seka Fabrikasından. So it was an idea to integrate the former workers into the educational programs and into the conceptualization of the museum, as nobody better knew the function of the machines and the processes and I'm happy that till today in certain events the Seka workers explain the machines. I think this is a very nice inclusive approach. It was somehow motivated, and we visited several museums and industrial heritage places also in Germany. Among them, and the architect came to visit Seka of Ruhr Museum. Ruhr Museum is nowadays World Heritage. It is an old coal mine, and it is very important also, let's say, to aspects of migration history in Germany, aspects of, let's say, intercultural history, as many Turkish workers contributed also to the post-Second World War industrialization, new industrialization in Germany, which should be also more memorized in my idea. And I'm planning in the future, and I hope one day it will succeed, to have a kind of migration museum in two spaces, one in Istanbul and maybe one in Germany, to memorize also this history, which is very important for the German and the Turkish memory culture, let's say. So this museum in Ruhr, Essen, it is near Essen, it's an old coal mine. We did also visit, they do have these aspects of daily life in and around the coal mine. It was somehow probably also an impulse to take up this idea to mainly visualize, musealize the daily work inside Seka Fabrik, the daily workers, daily life of the workers, and also around Seka. I mean, I said Seka was a microcosm. They had a football club, they had children's clubs, they did have several sport clubs, boxing, they had places of leisure. It was a huge and extended, vast area with 1,000 workers leaving the fabric every day. Yes, and to memorize this, luckily there were, of course, archives, photographies. there was, I mean, there's a living heritage of workers who were still alive and could tell about this. So that became a main anchor also for the concept, to visualize, musealize this daily telling the stories of the Seka workers at different places or at different stations in the technical process of the paper making inside the Seka fabric. Yes, okay. So I do think, honestly spoken, and I mean, maybe it should be, there should be some initiatives. I think the Seka card fabric does indeed have also become, also has the potentials to become a world industrial cultural heritage. That's for sure. Also, if you compare it with Ruhr Museum in Germany and other industrial heritage sites, we once wanted to do a comparative kind of symposium congress, because near Bremen we have an old wool fabric, which also was turned into a museum. So comparative exchange of colleagues from different disciplines, how to transfer former industrial spaces into cultural sites, museums, and educational spaces. And I think also there is in Istanbul, but also outside Istanbul in many places, there are many potentialities. And I think some spaces are already transferred sometimes into theaters, galleries, and yes, but Seka fabric, as I said, is a beautiful example and how it succeeded to realize this transformation. So here you can see, I mean, that was often the museological approach from the photographies into the space. So what did we do? I mean, what was done finally also? These photographies were somehow extending the object's space. I mean, for example, here you on the left side, you can see the walls, and in the back side, you can see the panorama, the photography. And it is beautifully realized thanks to the museological team and the architects. Also, the lighting is beautiful. I mean, when I came to these, I've seen, I mean, it was lost. This place was not lost, it was left, better to say it was. And I mean, like a worker who normally comes every day to the fabric, he opens his board, he changes his dress, and everything did still hang there. And I mean, this beautiful inner door of this board, it's also, I mean, we speak nowadays in cultural studies about material culture, about daily life things. And I mean, you can see there are so many small, we say, objects, but what is an object? It speaks to us, it communicates with us. And nowadays, also in cultural history and theory, we speak about emotional approaches. So emotions do have a very important impact on the perception of material culture. And I mean, you do know better the singers from probably 60s, 70s. I mean, sometimes it could be additionally, would have been nice also, you open this board, the door as a visitor, and you can hear maybe also the music. So what is very important, and that's why I'm thinking also from a let's say, perspective of post-pandemic paths of learning, I mean, of course, it has advantages. We can communicate digitally and we can communicate via such platforms, and we can be everywhere at the same time, and everybody can be at the same time in one place, the digital space. But for pandemic times, I really hope maybe we can do a tour together one day. So especially in public history and cultural history, it is needed to communicate with history. Communicating with history means to be in front of the object and to be in a dialogue with the object. So this communication, especially this emotional approach to material culture, cannot be replaced digitally. It's also a question of cognition and how do we perceive reality. It is not only visual also, but also visual is, if or in case it is reduced to two-dimensionality, it's something different than an object which is three-dimensional. I mean, Walter Benjamin, he spoke about the aura of an object. The object has an aura, and this is, in my opinion, a communicative potential, a communicative force, let's say a magic of the object. So this cannot be replaced digitally. That is the idea. I give you some other examples. Also, I mean, there is the Seka Fabrikasından band, you say, huh? The orchestra. And also, I mean, I found this drum. It was somehow in a corner somewhere. And I hopefully we will have the chance to visit the museum maybe one day together. You can see it was done beautifully then museologically. You have this drum in a showcase, and the showcase makes an object sometimes a little bit somehow sacral. It becomes, it underlines, it is lightened, and so the aura is somehow underlined. You can go around, and then there are beautiful places in which this drum is integrated, telling about the orchestra with photographies, with instruments. So this, I hope we can one day visit. So you can see here, it is really beautifully done. Also in the background, that was also another beautiful daily life object, the bicycle, in the, coming to the, okay. I mean, these were these two topics or columns, let's say. So the flow of paper making, let's say technical history of paper making, in industrialized technical history of paper making. Then the history of the fabric itself and its prehistory, from, let's say, Nicomedia to newspaper. And the third column, or the third space, and I come at this point to Göbekli Tepe, is to tell the history from pre-paper to beyond paper. We established a kind of educational space. I mean, one day I might like to speak in more detail about Göbekli Tepe, which was thankfully mentioned by your rector, dating back to 10,000, around 9,700 BC. So the so far oldest known, let's say, temple, yes, a kind of temple, before settlement of human beings. I mean, it's a transition period from gatherer and hunter society, as it is sometimes classified, to settlement, which we can see later than in Çatalhöyük, for example. So there's a beautiful study by Klaus Schmidt, who was in the team excavating, as it was told, since the 1990s. And it became World Heritage in 2018. And what is most impressive, in my opinion, are these sometimes sandstones, mainly sandstones, very huge columns, T-shaped form. They have a T-shaped form. Sometimes they are anthropomorphic, they have an anthropomorphic shape. And these, I mean, plastics, three-dimensional plastics of zoomorphic animals in the surrounding, mainly, they are not only from an art history point of view, very, very challenging to study them deeper. There are, I mean, we do not exactly know. There are certain approaches, certain attempts to try to understand the language of these images and sculptures, but most probably it is said they do have most probably they do have a kind of ritual meaning, but they could also be an encyclopedia of the living beings around. So we cannot say something with certainty at the moment. Nobody does this. It needs more study. One colleague did a study from a deep psychoanalyst approach from C.G. Jung, for example. So there are different approaches, but it needs a little bit more time. And to speak about Göbekli Tepe would need a session for its own, I think. I want to speak in the context of the history of paper. So that was the idea in this educational space, to start with Göbekli Tepe and to end after paper in the digitalized period. Göbekli Tepe at this period was not, I mean, there were already in 2009, I think there was an exhibition on Göbekli Tepe, traveling also to Bonn with reconstructed stela. But we started this educational path on the material culture, or the carriers of knowledge in material culture, its material manifestation, mainly following, or we tried to follow also the history of Anatolia and Turkey. There is this second step, in my opinion, from Göbekli Tepe, from this more abstract anthropomorphic figures, it gets more, which are mainly individual. We do find in Çatalhöyük, for example, we do find many sceneries, paintings, very often inside the living spaces, very interesting. And you can see it changes more to a depiction, representation of societal beings. And there's one study, I do not want to get into too deep inside now, this study called Dancing at the Dawn of Agriculture. It's a beautiful book. But we do have in Çatalhöyük also the first city map in the history of human beingness, for example. showing also this beautiful architecture, which seems to reflect a very egalitarian society. We do not have a palace in Çatalhöyük, or not even a big house. They are all very, let's say, egalitarian and beautiful, built with certain, giving shadows and so on. So from, let's say, anthropomorphic and zoomorphic figures in Göbekli Tepe to cave paintings, wall paintings, and engravings, I mean, I could speak maybe another time about this in more detail. We know that the development of writing can be traced back to, let's say, figural depictions, representations, and this figurativity turns more and more into abstract signs. This holds true as well for, I mean, if we look at the Sumerian, very early cuneiform writings, and the Istanbul Archaeological Museum has the second largest collection of cuneiform writings. That's why we did show a reproduction of a cuneiform writing with an astronomical text in the museum. We cooperated with the Archaeological Museum, with a colleague, was a very nice cooperation. And I mean, what else does it show? If we compare Göbekli Tepe with, let's say, cave paintings, wall paintings, Çatalhöyük, and other places in the world, the material culture of knowledge becomes more and more mobile. Imagine, could you carry a stela from Göbekli Tepe 5 tons to somewhere? No, not possible. It becomes easier, or you cannot carry a wall to another place. And it became more easier with the cuneiform writings. More mobility. And another step after the cuneiform writings, this, I think it was not as common in this, let's say in Anatolia, mainly in Egypt, as we do have papyrus in the Nile Delta, mainly there. And hand in hand with it, the abstraction of writing. I mean, if you look at the hieroglyphs in Egypt, you can see, for example, also in the sarcophags, you have sometimes the mummy can look out of the sarcophag from an eye. So there's an eye drawn into the sarcophag. This letter became later in Demotic, Coptic, Ein, also later in other languages. Ein is at the same time as the eye and the reflection. If you do look in a well in Arabic, it is like the reflection of an eye also. So this goes hand in hand with papyrus mainly, this development, but papyrus was quite sensitive. It is easily it can break a little bit, not as stable, but the library in Alexandria, they had copies, all their books were copied sometimes 3 times, and thousands of papyri rolls with all these, scientific and texts and so on. So just to say, in Anatolia, there was no papyrus used. Turkey was depending on the import of papyrus from Egypt. And when you do have, of course, conflicts, and the Mediterranean was always peaceful, more exchange, of course, and travel of knowledge, travel of goods, either than conflicts, in my opinion, and the Mediterranean can always bridge knowledge instead of unbridging knowledge in conflicts and so on. But in these periods, there was a shortage of papyrus. And papyrus did not come to Anatolia, to Turkey, which was the reason for, I mean, you know, the Bergama, Pergamon, and this is a background of producing parchment as an alternative for papyrus. I found it very interesting, and parchment was in scholastic Europe, I mean, all the monasteries, it was written on this technique, on the, I mean, it is a preparated animal skin on which it was written. That was the alternative to papyrus. So this process is explained in the educational space. Also, I mean, it goes back, I mean, you do have the name Lumpen, do you? Huh? It's the same name in German, it's Lumpen. Lumpen.
Yes.
Old, yes, you do have it, huh? It's interesting. Yes. It is old textiles were stamped with a certain technology, stamp technology, these molds to stamp to produce this pulpa, Kağıt hamur, and then it's shown other. These are miniatures from the German museum in Munich. They do have a very nice, beautiful miniatures. So you can look into a box and see this historical paper producing, drying, and so on. This technique goes back to, it is mainly, I mean, paper, it's a Chinese development, 2nd century. Then it came via Samarkand till Baghdad finally. And in the already in the end of the 8th century, the art of book, I mean, there were in Baghdad, there were many quarters producing books, writers and copyists and handicraft. And I mean, the book was probably one of the most important revolution in the carrying of knowledge, to spread knowledge, by copying before print, of course. I mean, the first printed book, or one of the first printed in Turkey, is from Kağıt. I think it is a map of the Black Sea, a very beautiful map of the Black Sea. So the beautiness of the book and the calligraphy, miniature painting, all these steps are shown, these stations. And what is most important, in my opinion, and I hope it can be revived in a post-pandemic period, also, I mean, I do follow a method in teaching, which we call in German forschendes Lernen, which we could translate it as researching or studying by researching. So the students also develop projects themselves. And what is the main idea is to get out of the classroom sometimes. I think it is good to get out of the classroom. Nowadays, we cannot do it, it's clear. But in post-pandemic times, I think there is also the need to learn and to study in communication with realities of material culture and oral history and so on. And there in the museum, we can do paper by our own. This is also, I mean, it is experimental learning, sometimes to understand from a historical point of view, to understand, let's say, how paper was made or how a certain astronomical instrument was used. It is always the best to apply it by yourself in order to understand it. Sometimes only abstraction does not help to understand. And this, I mean, emotional approach to, let's say, cultural history and the understanding of history and the understanding of paper making, best is to do paper by your own. This holds not true only for children, also for adults. I mean, we speak of lifelong learning, it never stops. But yeah, to make paper is something really beautiful. Yeah, this is, I mean, that's a question and I want to discuss it with you. Certain museums, they show it in this manner in Germany. I think this is the Nixdorf Museum, or maybe also Munich. I have to verify this. I mean, nowadays, you know, what is a library? A library, I mean, a place sometimes with thousands or even 100,000 of books. But this library nowadays digitally fits on some megabyte. I mean, it is a very small electronical storage. But yeah, for me, it is also the question. And I think Seka has these potentials and other places as well. And I think a library in which you sometimes, I did this in Munich, for example, at Munich library, it was open till 12 o'clock. And sometimes at 10 o'clock, I fall asleep. And everybody slept in the library. Not everybody, I mean, many studied, of course. But if you sit there for 8 hours, sometimes you can fall asleep. But you are surrounded by, yes, by material objects, books, and you open them, you can touch them, you can smell them. We are sometimes to work with old manuscripts. And the whole societal atmosphere in the library, of course, it is something different. The question of, I mean, artificial intelligence and maybe programs do know better what you read than yourself, or what you should read even. I mean, it has advantages. But I think this emotional approach is also a neat challenge for future, also university, also teaching in universities. So, I mean, it's a short overview, and hopefully we can visit one day Seka Paper Museum together. And I thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Professor Quinten, for this very detailed presentation about the history of paper, how it produced in the geography of Anatolia, and it's back from also Egypt and the most related geographies towards cultural heritage and its reflections on modern relations. And this is why this is very important for being a topic of science, society, and its relations to both in people and industrialized countries. Like you gave some examples from Germany. I have been to Munich as well also, and I have been visited to Museum of the Cars, which mostly the famous ones is the BMW, Audi, and Mercedes. When you go there, you can see the history of those production, how those tools and modern way of industrialization came together and reflect itself on the relations and daily lives of people in Germany. When I have been in also in Munich Technical University, I was in there for a lecture, and I saw that the students and scholars are all these affected this industrialization and its reflections on daily life. I mean the professional life on time and an effective one. At the end of the daily life, they can continue the other concerns out of professions. And I saw this is not a luckily one. It is a fact. All the countries, lived this process in their historical background. And this is why you saw and you projected us how it responded on the background of Seka Paper Factory from its journey from Anatolia to Izmit. And it's how reflected the local history of Izmit and Kocaeli. Today also, the people are living around the Seka Paper Museum can see these reflections, and can they talk about what they lived and what their families lived there and how they benefited from the production facilities, and it's for their also a sort of wealth and its reflections to their contemporary lives as well. And thank you very much again. And the audience can ask the questions via YouTube channel. It is on live, and I'm looking the questions again also simultaneously. But before doing this, I would like to ask a question about your presentation, and I would be very pleased to get also to share all the audiences can be benefited from them. And you mentioned the role of Mediterranean culture, which is inclusive and which is very understandable for the differences. I mean, they were in together in diversity. And we know, see and challenging the era of post-COVID-19, we will see how the relations will be changed. But I believe the world also needs again a culture of Mediterranean and its heritage and reflections on the country-to-country relations as well. And do you think that the Mediterranean culture and its some types of historical facts like paper, like the other devices or the tools that the human beings are using now, and how do you see this role of the new way of Mediterranean cultural understanding for this post-COVID-19 era or contemporary world politics or daily lives?
Yeah, thank you for this, very good, interesting question. I mean, if you study the history of knowledge, and you can really go back to Göbekli Tepe and the travel of knowledge, then, of course, I mean, even in the later Neolithic period, and this is shown beautifully in the Troja Museum also, I mean, in these periods, we didn't have these, let's say, nowadays national borders, and we didn't have any patent law of the WTO, for example. So knowledge flowed also across the Mediterranean, what we might call open access nowadays. And this holds true, of course, for, I mean, let's say the cuneiform writings, and you have always, I think you have specificities and you have universalities. I mean, cuneiform writings were not used so much in Egypt, but for example, Ishtar from Gilgamesh, you do find in the Egyptian mythology. And if you look at the deities also, which became later Greek ones, often are traced back to Old Egyptians, and the Old Egyptian god Thoth became Hermes. And yeah, and even Hermes is also in the Quran. So you do find these traveling of mythologies, knowledges, and so on, and its materials. Of course, mainly in peaceful times. Peace is always a condition for flourishing of exchange of knowledge, trade, and so on. Sometimes there were, let's say, more peaceless periods. But if you do look at the long history from Göbekli Tepe to nowadays, I mean, it was less for thousands of years, sometimes I think less destructive than nowadays. So the development, somehow we progressed into an area of no return. That is another subject. But I do think in the hopefully even it should be in these periods, I mean, to be aware that the well-being of societies is based on the exchange of knowledge, and not only trade and knowledge, of course, both at the same time. This requires peaceful relations inside, outside, and across the Mediterranean. This is for sure. And history is a good example. I mean, maybe Göbekli Tepe and the people of Göbekli Tepe can be an example for this.
Yes, and I saw this is an exactly very good concluding for the solutions of the international community now challenging with, and Göbekli Tepe, Çatalhöyük, and the other agricultural areas, whether in Turkey, whether in Germany, whether in the different geographies of the world, show that how the ancestors of human beings can be done and live in peace. And this is why I think not just social sciences, but also in the world of science and scholars and the other parts of the society needs to look deep in these analysis and its reflections to daily lives. And this is why it's a part of the archaeology and the historical facts of both the history of Turks, both the history of Germans. Also, when they look, they should see this some common heritages and its reflections on the different parts of the societal things and needs. And thank you very much again, Professor Quinten, for this very precious and very interesting presentation about the journey of paper from the historical one to industrialized one, and its reflections on the daily lives and its reflections on both workers, both hosts, and both the daily lives of the people living around the İzmit and Kocaeli. And I checked, and all the audience sent the thanks to you for your presentations, and also for my hope we can visit together this Seka Paper Museum soon with the scientific guide of yourself. And we would be very pleased to join as the Istanbul Commerce University, and particularly my department, Political Science and International Relations. I do very wish to participate with my students and colleagues to this distinguished Seka Paper Museum and such related museums like Istanbul Archaeological Museum in Istanbul. And we know this background serves us different types of research and differentiated qualified research about the contemporary world politics. Again, thank you very much for your participation. And I would like to give the last speech to you if you would like to add something or share some thoughts, or anyone, what you would like to add. Thank you very much again.
Yeah, no, thank you very much to you and your very kind and deep reflected moderation. No, it stays to me, I mean, just to think Füsun and Füsun Hoca, you and Rector UJ, I'm very amazed and impressed and happy to be in exchange with you. Hopefully, really, we can do this, and maybe a visit would be great.
Yes, hopefully.
Yes, let's see. And I think we stay in contact and we stay in exchange. And I thank you once again for this kind invitation and your initiative for this.
You are all welcome. And we do very pleased to also visit you at Turkish-German University in Beykoz. And this is also very nice and good contribution for Turkish higher education, to being a participation and contribution for the both Turkish and German governments. This will enhance also these intercultural and interdisciplinary works in Turkish and German academia as well. We are very pleased to also have you as being part of this mission here again. Thank you very much. And dear distinguished guests, ladies, gentlemen, and dear academic staff and the administrative ones for Istanbul Commerce University, today we made the topic about the Seka paper company, and it's back to cultural heritage in Turkey, and it roots from the Anatolian geography and worldwide history. Again, thank you very much for joining us, and we do wish a healthy and good days for you all participants.